Okay, so when we put this topic on the agenda, I basically demanded of our events team that I had to be part of it, not only because I'm a Poshmark super user, so I wanted to chat with you, but because I'm a little bit obsessed with this topic. So this is, we talked about performance versus brand. I think everyone, and Marissa, I've heard you talk about this on our stages at Adweek. It's not a verse, it's not or, it has to be and. So is it possible to balance these things? How do you think about these things and balance them? Stephen, let's start with you.
So I often think that balancing it also first redefining what it means, because people think brand is brand marketing. When I think of brand as like everyone's job is to build brand equity, right? Because brand equity leads to shareholder value. There's the positioning element, which is the creative and the emotion, and there's the activation, which is the promotions and the channel. And trying to explain to teams how those two work together, I always think is honestly one of the best jobs we all have as CMO leaders. Being able to connect to people how those things tie together, actually sometimes even create healthy tensions. I think it's the either or is probably a false narrative that always end up being out there, because you're competing for budgets, you're competing for attention. Also, sometimes people don't know how to connect it properly. I do think that ultimately a really great brand has great brand equity because these things all work together in unison. And performance marketing has always been around. It was just called direct mail before, right? I think now it's just bits and bytes. But at the end, you still want to connect with your audience. You want to get them to do more of the same thing, and you want to do it profitably. And I think that's, to me, that's the narrative I share with my team all the time. As someone who came from a brand background and a performance, my job is a little bit like, oh, here's how the two connect together. And they're like, oh, okay. And I often feel like that, oh, okay, becomes the moment where you're going from teaching to then you can transform and be like, how do we do more of it?
So Stephen, you're a first-time CMO and you came into this role, and I imagine you anticipated it was going to be very much performance focused.
Yes.
So how did you kind of convince people to think about the brand side of it?
It's a good question. So when I came in, I actually realized that the performance team was actually quite strong, that I didn't have to do too much actually, that the tweaking needed probably would be on just how to innovate inside the box, not having to think outside the box. So we had so many tools and resources. I used to joke that when I came in, first thing I saw in the first month was like, oh my God, there's so much low-hanging fruit. It's not even low-hanging fruit, it's the fruit's on the floor. We just have to pick it up. Explaining to people how to do certain kinds of testing, how product marketing positions and benefits. The stuff that I'd learned from all the big companies I've worked at and all the other tech companies, I was able to bring in people who were really hungry for that learning. Mm-hmm. So it made my job easier that there were people that wanted to hear what I was teaching, and that people are also open to transforming eventually. But I didn't want to be the CMO that came in and said in the first 6 months, let's go hire a very expensive agency to redo the brand and launch a very expensive campaign, because I knew that my shelf life would be very short. In fact, we actually didn't even redo the brand until my 4th year. And I've been in the job for 5.5 years now. I felt like that's how much time it took me to understand the business, to understand when you really needed to evolve the brand versus just accepting it as it is, and really getting the two of them to work together, because our brand teams and our performance teams are finally in that stage where when I explain I want to do this, they're all coming from the same place of oh, okay, I see how it ties to me. It's not, oh, they're doing this or doing that.
Interesting. Marissa, what's it like at, let's call it more of a legacy brand? Yeah. How do you think about that balance in that conversation?
Legacy and a very operationally focused organization, right? A retailer. What I found when I joined 7-Eleven about 4.5 years ago was that there was a really strong intuitive understanding of the brand and of the brand equity among the entire organization, including our 5,000 franchisees. But what they needed to understand was how we needed to continue to build that brand equity. Mm-hmm. And kind of going back to Marcus Collins' talk earlier today, we do that by signaling meaning through our actions, through how we treat our customers, through the assortment that we stock, et cetera. And so helping the organization, actually a lot of the teaching that you just described, Stephen, was a really important part. So it wasn't a rebuild, it was helping the organization understand what the brand is, giving them new language to describe the brand. So we went through a big brand purpose exercise in the first year that I was at 7-Eleven, and actually rolled it out to the entire operations and franchisee organization, so they understand the brand purpose and how that shows up in their lives on a daily basis when they're interacting with our customers. But beyond that, what I've found where we really needed to build more awareness and understanding is around this concept of availability, which I know everyone in this room understands, physical and mental availability. Mm-hmm. And at 7-Eleven, we have over 13,000 stores in North America. We also have a 24/7 delivery app, so we've got the physical piece covered. Mm-hmm. What we need to work on is the mental availability, and not just unaided awareness or consideration, but actually preference and choice. And so helping, again, the organization understand that the next big battle for us to fight and to win with our customers has been a really important part of the journey. And marketing plays a role in doing that.
Did everyone know there's 7-Eleven delivery? Is that the most important
7
thing
now.
that we've learned today?
Check it out. You won't regret it.
So this isn't a new debate, but I want to talk a little bit about the why now and why it's so top of mind for so many people in this room and beyond. And I think COVID seemed to be this inflection point, and it's sort of, there was a bit of a return or a shift to more of a focus on performance, or more of a performance-based moment. Are we on the other side of it? Is there a shift back to brand and creativity? Where are we kind of balancing out? And then Matt, I want to talk to you specifically about like the social platforms and how algos are changing all of that.
I mean, one framework that I've used in discussing the role of marketing at my organization is really, it's a financial analogy. It's the P&L and the balance sheet, and explaining how different marketing levers drive sales overnight versus build the brand over time, and how you have to do both. Like, we would all agree, if we're CEO, we need to have a strong and healthy balance sheet as well as a growing P&L. And so framing it in that language has really helped us cut through the performance versus brand one over the other or in place of. And it gives me as the CMO, as well as the organization, more flexibility to kind of lean in one area or the other, depending on where our business is at, depending on where our customers are at, so that it's kind of a spectrum, right? And so we can dial up or down different types of tactics and messaging, but with the goal of always having some element of brand building in what we do, and some element of driving action.
So Matt, I know you feel that social platforms have allowed people or forced people, depending on how you think about it, to think more about data, and there's sort of this glut of insights available. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that, if we go back to 2020 and when everything changed, I think that there was a sort of immediate need from the CFOs to preserve capital and then to redirect that capital to ways that we could show an immediate effect on the bottom line. And a lot of CFOs had this sort of notion that today's marketing budget needs to pay for next month's marketing budget by showing proceeds. And as more and more of that thinking set in, more and more marketers were exposed to the data that they would get back from social platforms, search platforms, increasingly connected TV, which while running on the largest screens in our home, operates on digital plumbing and wiring. And what that data sort of, I think, lit up was that increasingly marketers of all stripes and up and down the org had access to data that they could use, and the question was, should they use it? And increasingly, in comparison to channels that didn't have that kind of rich data trove, they were saying, well, this one is giving me something that's immediate, pretty clear. Maybe we quibble with some of the, what it means on the margins, but I can take this back to my CFO and have that discussion about what my budget should be next month when we are operating month to month or quarter to quarter. And like a lot of other consumer behaviors during COVID, I think this one has kind of become a little durable from a marketer's perspective.
So you mentioned CFOs, so I'm going to jump to this question. How do you two, in this creative brand-focused space, how do you talk to your CFO and your CEO, and what are the skills that you bring to those conversations so that they can see the value of sort of the squishier topics or the metrics that are harder to measure?
So I'll take this on because I'm very fortunate, even in my last role, our CFO was actually very pro-marketing. Right, it was
You're
wonderful.
So lucky.
It was wonderful. Versus an interview I had once with an unnamed CFO who asked me to then say how do you justify the value of marketing? I was like, we're not doing this. I'm sorry.
Did you walk out of
No,
the
I literally
interview
walked
right
out. I
then?
was like, sorry, I'm not doing this. For me, if anything, it was really being able to meet them at the place where they understand how to think about the language. So for me, it's not just I'm cutting budgets. Really, my word is marketing leverage. How do my actions, whether myself or my team, drive marketing leverage, which then helps the P&L? So an example is hey, we're going to do the strategic brand placement of a TV spot, which will help our unaided awareness, which will help our lower cost or CAC, which then gets marketing leverage. Or we're going to extend our capabilities to this external agency, which will drive productivity and lower headcount with more marketing leverage. So being able to first meet them there and speak their language is the first step to getting that acceptance. Two is like sharing a lot of the knowledge that you have, because if anything, I would say some CFOs, by the way, are the best places for marketing ideas, because everyone thinks they're a marketer, right? But CFOs also come up with such a logical way of doing it. I used to go to our CFO and be like, so what's in your head this past weekend? And literally I would take his idea and then build on that. And so I think that also means that they have a say in how we do things. And I think number three, it's like to the performance conversation, optimization is now done by all the robots, right? I think the big question now is investment allocation. Investment allocation is about what's brand building activities, money's gonna put food on the table, and how does that continually balance? And I think we have this wonderful role as CMOs to be able to constantly think about that push and pull between investing for today, for tomorrow, and like, as my CEO loves to say, putting food on the table. But I said most CEOs actually get brand building. They know that if you get a chance, there's a great podcast from the Goldman Sachs podcast from this woman who spoke for Permira, and she talked about brand building in literally the most clearest way. She basically, the thesis was like, brand building is important for brand equity, ultimately for pricing power.
Yep.
If you have pricing power, you can do whatever the F you want, right? And if you can speak that language of connecting brand equity to pricing power, you're in the wheelhouse of working with a finance team and getting all the money you want.
I totally agree. You got to speak their language, which is marketers, know your audience. So we understand that. I would add 2 points. One is, depending on the organization and their acumen and understanding of marketing, you may need to also educate them on different measurement approaches to demonstrate the impact to the business. And so at 7-Eleven, we have a very simple measurement framework. It's a classic 4-up box of strategic and tactical KPIs that are either leading or lagging. And we report on those metrics on a regular basis. And we actually built that framework in partnership with our finance organization to ensure that they had a chance to kick the tires, agree with the methodology, and felt like it was credible, and that they kind of had an ownership stake in it. And so being able to do that builds credibility. So that would be kind of a build on that. The third would just be, if you haven't had a discussion with your finance team about the role of creativity, I think it's a really important one to have.
Yes.
And the way the punchline is leverage, honestly. Creativity allows you to punch above your weight. It allows you to deliver more ROI for every dollar that you invest. And I know in our organization, our budgets are relatively small. And so we have to hit above, punch above our weight limit, right? And the role of creativity is a really important strategy for marketing at 7-Eleven, but not just for marketing, for the business. And the finance team seems to kind of get that once you kind of put it in those terms.
So Matt, at Mountain, you work with various CMOs, marketing teams at different points in their journey of using and understanding performance and metrics. What are the skill sets that you feel like, what are the commonalities in CMOs who get it and who are able to use performance and kind of weave these two things together?
That's a good question. And I think Marissa's onto it, that they understand that the distinctions sometimes are a bit overblown in the sense that performance and brand have to be seen as symbiotic.
Yep.
And a performance campaign that erodes your brand cannot exist. And a brand campaign that is left to a wishy-washy, it felt right, cannot exist.
Yeah.
So, I think the skill sets that we see successful CMOs bringing together, first of all, is an understanding that this is not you must declare team brand or team performance. You have to find a way to bring them together. And the way that they weave them is through two lenses. And you hit on just one of them, Marissa, which is creative. As our CEO likes to say, that you can set up the most brilliant performance campaign, and I'm sure, Stephen, you know this too, with all the right audience targeting and the channel strategy is exactly right. But if you get the creative wrong, it will fail. Yep. And on the flip side, it will cover for a lot of sins as well.
Yeah.
So creative, and the other is audiences. And CMOs that can understand, okay, here are my audiences that are likely to be in market. How do I serve them the right creative and the right channel at the right time? And to be able to deliver that data back to the CFO to make them feel good about the investment and to unlock that next round of investment for me. These are the sorts of skills that we see successful CMOs. And the other one I would say is they understand how it all works. Like the days of a CMO not knowing how their technology works and how well it works are, I think, ending quickly.
Yeah. So one thing I think a lot about, I run the newsroom at Adweek, and there's an analogy to what we're talking about, which is you want journalists to go on their gut instinct to say, I have this great source. We don't have historical data to say this story is going to do really well, but I just have a feeling. But you also want them to be really fluent in data, and you want them to make data-based decisions. So I'm curious, and this is purely for selfish reasons, because I'm wondering, like, how do you keep morale up and keep a group of creative thinkers invested in not feeling like robots, but also focused on the data?
So I'll tackle this one. When I think about my creative team, when I first came, there was actually only 2 people in the creative team, so I've built it out to about 15 people now. Is really helping people understand as creatives, they also want to do really good work. They hate rejection. But also certain creatives are actually only good at certain things. So, like my daily creative team probably couldn't do a TV spot, probably couldn't do an outdoor ad, and being able to show them that there's different pathways for each of them to actually succeed, even separate from the data, is one way to like keep morale up, saying, hey, other people are going to be involved, we're going to collaborate with others, but also when you see really great creative, be like, that's amazing. I think the second part is that the data has a role, but it actually ends up with you. So as an example, I recently had our growth team was doing a bunch of AI ads. And of course, our creative team was like, these look crappy. And I said, well, I'm actually happy that they did it. That's 1. 2, it's actually not that bad. And number 3, I'd like to see the results first, right? Because at the end, there are people who are, protectors of the brand, protectors of the creative pillar. But at some point, it's like, is it really that bad? Was it really that awful? The goal I wanted everyone to focus, like, we're using AI in our ads. That's wonderful, right? That helps not just assist people, but also not replace, assist people, but to actually drive innovation. And I think sometimes reframing what the opportunity is for the business as a whole is part of how you keep that morale up.
Yeah, I would add that not every creative needs to be a data analyst. We have data analysts who are really good at that. But I do expect my creative partners to be knowledgeable and curious about the business. They need to understand what are the levers that drive sales and profit. At least conversant in that, so that they can build creative that drives results. The other thing is, we all work on teams, and so the second thing we encourage on my team is, like, if you don't know the answer to a question, but hopefully you're curious enough to ask the question, we can help you figure out who does know the answer, and it's probably someone on the team. If it's not, we'll find the right person. But really, kind of circling it back to teamwork, to a broader operational or enterprise understanding. So the answer may not be someone on the marketing team. It might be someone in operations or in the merchandising organization, et cetera. And feeling comfortable and confident to go ask those people those questions, build those relationships and rapport so that they can be knowledgeable about the business.
That's great.
I just will add one thing. I think to what you said earlier about I think it's for the whole team, is just having that intellectual humility, because not all the performance marketers have all the answers. Definitely not. And not all the brand people have all the right answers either. But how do you create that and foster that culture of intellectual humility that people want to understand how things work on the other side?
Yeah.
I think is what then fosters be like, oh, okay, how can I use that to do a better job? Everyone wants to do a better job.
Yeah, I like that. So Matt, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and just to be provocative with this question, like, does creativity have a place at Mountain? Like, do you care about it?
Yes. Well,
Good answer, Matt.
But we know it to be true. Nielsen Catalina studied this 5 years ago, and I still think the data holds, that they looked at the impact of all the inputs that marketers can have on a campaign, creative, channel strategy, targeting, and creative accounted for 47% of all outcomes. Everything else combined was 53%. So we absolutely respect that, and we have a subsidiary that is dedicated to building creative that performs, that is built to address many companies have been a 10x increase in their creative needs over the last 10 years. The assets, they just need to keep the campaigns well fueled. And that requires just a different mindset, a different relationship with the agencies, a different expectation of internal teams. So we 100% get the creative, but I think to Marissa's point, we also are focused on bringing the creative teams and the media teams into the same room, because they haven't always gotten along in that room together.
Right, yeah, that's a good
Can
one.
I add something? I've noticed that younger creatives are much more open to learning the business. And I don't mean that in like an ageist way, but it seems like there's a lot more openness and kind of excitement and energy to lean in and learn something than maybe what I experienced when I was first starting out in my career in marketing and working with creatives. So I'm seeing, I think, a generational shift also in what creatives are interested in and, you know, capable and eager to do in terms of making an impact with their craft.
Very true.
That's really encouraging. It gives me faith in the future
Yeah.
of my newsroom and of your businesses too. Well, thank you very much. We're out of time. As we said before, we could talk for hours about this, so maybe we'll continue it over lunch. But thanks everyone for
Great.
joining for
Thank
this.
you.
and-
Thank you.